Hi. Welcome to STRIcast. I'm Steve Gingell, the Operations Manager for Agronomy, and I have with me Ben Morgan, who is one of our consultant agronomists. Today we're going to talk about an article Ben wrote a little while ago on wet golf greens not affecting or dampening the playability of that surface. I suppose it's quite interesting when we look back over the summer and it was really dry and long and we had drought issues, but we're now in a completely different situation where we've had far too much rainfall, and that's starting to cause some real problems on our golf greens. What sort of things do you think that is affecting on the greens specifically, Ben?
Well, they seem to find that a lot of people are obviously concentrating on keeping the greens watered throughout summer, so they didn't get as much chance to do other jobs around the greens. It was mainly like irrigation, wetting agents, that type of thing. So there was, it seemed like a bit of a build-up of thatch levels on the golf greens over the...
Okay, so what exactly is thatch and how does it build up?
So thatch is basically just undigested organic matter that's produced by the grass plant as a natural process. It produces like woody stems through the roots, and then also the leaves grow, get cut, and sometimes just lay down a bit like you'd get like a forest floor canopy. You'd get leaves and branches laying down. It's a similar but in a micro scale on a golf green.
And that causes problems potentially of poor drainage in the upper profile, and therefore the greens are a lot softer in the winter, possibly a lot drier in the summer. Is that right?
Yeah, it works as like a sponge really in the top surface. If you've got more than say a centimetre, below the surface, it can be made up of different things. But if you have a build up on the surface, it can work as a sponge in winter and hold on to too much moisture. Then conversely, it can get a dry patch as well in the summer, which can be another issue you have to deal with.
Do you think climate change, for me climate change is really interesting, and you look at the data and it's looking like we're getting drier summers and then much wetter dumps of rainfall. I suppose that's going to really impact how quickly thatch builds up, and also then the strategies that golf green keepers have to take in terms of managing that element. My passion is making sure we get all thatch out of a green. What's your reflection of how perhaps we could get our organic matter or reduce organic matter in the surfaces?
I think we probably have to change our tactics because in the past we were able to use big processes in like spring and autumn where we would like traditionally hollow core, take a lot of thatch out, top dress or sand onto the greens and try and replace it and try and get a bit of an exchange program going. The problem now is with these windows of opportunity to do these big renovations are reducing lower and lower. So I think we now need to look at different ways of doing it. So perhaps switching your tactics to more regular lighter top dressings to try and dilute that thatch level and use it as a stabilising material on the surface to create a firmer green. And then when you're looking at thatch removal, other methods such as linear aeration or micro tining, like some of these, like not to mention any brand names, but sort of ninja tines or these types of things where you can get in, remove thatch, and it doesn't disturb any play.
Yeah, it's really interesting because for me the problem also greenkeepers are facing is this requirement to have really good surfaces all year round. And golfers hate holes and hate sand on the dressing on the surface. And I have one golf course, and a few are following it, where rather than having a specific time that we would actually do an aeration or a sand dressing, so 3-4 times a year, they do something every week. So they do like 3 greens a week, very small tines, and thatch removal, lots of sand. And it's amazing how much sand these golf courses have actually managed to get on the surface, which is really helping the thatch work out.
It does accumulate, doesn't it, over time? I think that little and often approach is you don't notice it. It builds up over the year time, and it does make a bigger effect.
So what do you think about the amount of sand we really should be putting on per year?
I think it depends how you look at it. Obviously, it does 2 different things. You can, if you're punching holes in the greens and then filling them with sand, you're creating sand channels through the profile, which help with drainage, percolation rates, infiltration rates. But then the other way of looking at it is using it to smooth out greens. So as as a target overall, STRI recommends around 180 tonnes plus sort of thing. But it depends how you're using it. It depends on budget. The actual, the source of sand could become a problem in the future. The prices could go up of sand. I think you're looking at about £35 a tonne, ordering sort of a 29-tonne Arctic load. So the price is going up. It was £30 a few years ago. So we might have to look at things like what is the most important. I would say smoother greens is probably more important in most scenarios. Obviously, if you're trying to increase infiltration rates, you might have to go higher rates. But I think rather than looking at a target, we have to sort of think more of a more each case by each case scenario sort of program.
No, definitely, and I think it's really interesting with the organic matter testing that we do regularly, and I've certainly seen that if you're below 120 tonnes per hectare, you kind of don't really reduce your organic matter.
Yeah.
And with some clauses which are over 200, it becomes you see a lot of progress, but then when you stop that level, often thatch builds again.
Yeah.
So it's quite a difficult challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
I suppose for me, we need to get rid of the thatch first. So it's that emphasis to make the greens drier, more free draining, therefore more playable in the winter, but also allow us to be more sustainable in terms of those grasses which are less disease prone, less fertiliser, less water, and so on.
Yeah,
that's interesting. What about some of the other issues that can impact on a golf course? So you talked about in your article about shade. And then green drainage, which we'll come on into a little bit. So
I think it's looking like, obviously you've got on a 18-hole course, you've got 18 greens, and each one of them could have a different microclimate. I think you've got to try and aim to create an environment for each of the greens, really, if you can. Look at them. Have they got poor air movement? Have they got shade issues? Have they got poor drainage on that particular one? There might be different constructions, but I think we need to start creating the environment to then make them more sustainable, so you can get sort of better grasses, like bent grasses and stuff for the future that are more disease tolerant. I think all of these things are all part of an integrated approach to try and create that sustainable environment for the future, so you have less problems long term.
I've used some of these apps which you can get on an iPad, and you can sort of see where the shade is most likely to be at any time of year, and you can be quite specific about whether you need to crown lift or whether there are perhaps one or two, in this current world we live in, taking trees out is never popular. So sometimes you have to make the trees which are there better, but remove the ones which are causing the greatest shade. And I think that demands quite a strategy.
It does, really. I think because you've got to have a woodland management strategy for any piece of land, and I think that if even estates will have to have a woodland management plan. There are certain woodlands that you have that are unmanaged, but they could become very unruly. I think a managed woodland is the key, and that doesn't involve just cutting down every tree. That can be involving looking at certain specimens around the course. That could be a mixed, different types as well, to in case you get any kind of diseases wiping them out. But I think when you've got really overgrown woodland that's just self-seeders, there's no air movement, most of it's brambles. I mean, for one point, it's impossible to play out of that area, so you've just cut out a large percentage of your golf course that you can play out of. So I think it's, trying to get the most out of your golf course, having a good woodland management plan is key, really.
The other area, I think that's very interesting. I mean, it's a really important part of managing that whole estate, isn't it?
Yeah.
Golf course. I was also very interested in your article. You talked about greens drainage, because it's an area that I'm quite fascinated in. You look at the USGA golf green, which should drain really, really well, and predominantly does, as the thatch is under control and no layering. But also, we deal with a lot of greens which are traditionally built with some kind of sand layer on top of a clay bowl, with hopefully something permeable underneath.
Yeah, hopefully.
It's often not the case. And the need, whilst thatch undoubtedly holds the water from the top, there is a point, and particularly on these wetter greens where the water builds up from underneath.
Yeah, definitely.
And we need to then be thinking about drainage
Yeah.
of some kind. What's your thoughts on drainage?
Yeah, it's a good point, and I was speaking to someone last week about this, like of course who's looking at the very same thing. They've got traditional old greens that are over 100 years old, and they are thinking, what can they do to the greens? They've done all the normal stuff like deep tine aeration and sort of pencil tined as well. They've mixed the different types of aeration. They've followed that up with dressings, and they've got as far as they can get with the actual profile, but they've come to a point where they need to put drainage in. They were actually looking at like PC drainage, where you pull it through as a bit of an option. It's something I need to look into more just to see what the benefits are, and long term whether you keep the benefit. But the other alternatives are just like pipe drainage, or you can put in standard sort of herringbone systems.
Yeah. Well, I've got a number of courses done a bit of everything, almost all the types possible.
Yeah.
And I think the ones which work the best in the long term, but ultimately give a little bit more surface disruption, is just your traditional pipe drainage, lateral drainage.
Yeah.
And you can control that, and it'll last 20 years, and it's not impacted greatly by changing holes.
Yeah.
Interestingly, I have a few golf courses have found the PC rope type drainage working very, very well, and others which have gone for micro drainage, which is almost like an excavated slit with a pipe in the bottom, and that's worked really, really well as well. Others, if you've got a friable medium underneath that will take water, then some of the clubs are using almost using a post hole borer to create a core.
Yeah, I've seen
that's
this.
at very close centres.
Yeah.
And seeing that can pull water through.
Yeah.
But I think for me, what you said in your article is absolutely spot on. That you can't often deal with get the top drier unless your bottom is got the water's got somewhere to go. And I think that's a really interesting point you made on there.
Yeah, every action has like a consequence, doesn't it? And when you look at the way the water, like a droplet comes, from the sky, lands on the surface, and goes all the way through the system, it needs somewhere to go. Yeah. You need a decent outfall on each green, really.
I think for me, so almost in conclusion to all of this, you come back really to the climate change, which is we know it's going to be more problematic in the future, and you almost can't just. You have to have a strategic approach, if you like, to managing your golf green. Yeah, and just going how we do it at the moment is probably not going to be right in the future. Yeah. So therefore, we have to start to implement a lot of these, or if you've got them implemented, intensify these strategies to try and get these greens to work better. Yeah, because if you stand still, you're effectively going backwards on these things. And through infiltration testing, you could test like a traditional green, and you might be something like 5 millimeters per hour, really low. It's surprising how low it can actually be. And if you're getting 10, 15 mil of rain or more than that in one downpour, which we seem to be getting a lot more, you need to have the greens back in order at least by the end of that day. If not, they might have demands of a couple of hours, and then they want to be out playing. So you need to have around that, as a millimeters per hour sort of thing. And I think it's interesting that even the good old USGA, which should work. If you look at any historic USGA, there's often layering, which can have a really big impact, and that whole changing climate is starting to impact. A lot were badly built as well, of course. Well, there is that, different depths and sort of, but not all of them. But they're not all they're not the be all and end all sort of thing. They still have the problems, don't they? Yeah, no, absolutely. So, in summary of your article, "Don't Let Wet Greens Dampen Your Play," is all about managing that profile. So, understanding where water has perhaps been held, and if it's in the thatch layer, and it's an extensive deal with that. Yeah. If it's a fundamental structural issue, then work on that with different options. Would that be? Yeah, I would say so. With any drainage system, really, you want to start from the outfall. Where is the water going, eventually to, and that can also have other implications. You need to make sure you can drain into certain ditches. That's another thing that's coming in water management, like as a sort of as a long-term plan. But if you look from the outfall and then go up to the green, you need to have primary drainage on your green, and then you need to turn your green into like a secondary drainage catchment area. So any water that comes through goes through the
low amount of thatch layer into your secondary drainage, into your primary drainage, and out through the outfall. And then mixed with that as well, create a better environment around the green where you've got better air movement. Perhaps you could remodel the greens. Some of them were old dew pond greens, which were designed to hold on to water, so they might have sort of ridges around the edge. You could soften those out to create air movement through there. So it's very much an integrated strategy around drainage and improving each climate around the greens.
Ben, thank you very much. That's very interesting.
Yeah, thank you, Steve.